the Start Your Own Business podcast. Hear inspiring startup stories and get reliable expert advice on how to start your business and get off to the best possible start. Brought to you by Startup Donut, helping small businesses succeed.
Hi there, thanks for joining us. My name's Fiona Pryor and you're listening to the Start Your Own Business podcast. Quick question for you. How much do you really know about managing the financial side of your business? If the answer's not that much, you're probably not alone. Most of the people starting their own business won't have a financial background, and many will have little or no experience of managing business finances. Although you don't need to become a financial whiz, knowing just a few basics and devoting enough time and effort to managing the financial side of your business could have a major bearing on the success of your business and the financial rewards that you ultimately get from it. So, how do you manage your business finances successfully as a startup? What are the key areas you need to focus on? What challenges do you need to overcome? And what are the classic mistakes that you need to avoid? To get the answers to these burning questions on business finances, I'll be speaking to chartered accountant Kate Gloudemans, experienced financial director and founder of Somerset-based accountancy firm Sprout. But before we meet Kate, let's find out a bit more about Lightyear, the sponsor of this episode. Life as a business owner can be unpredictable. You need a cash flow cushion for any bumps in the road. But this doesn't mean you need to leave your cash languishing in low-interest accounts. Instead, you can earn a daily variable rate of 4.6% AER with Lightyear's business accounts. Lightyear make this possible by giving small businesses like yours a solution traditionally reserved for the big corporates. Money market funds, managed by the world's largest asset manager BlackRock. These are low-risk investments, usually only accessible with a minimum deposit of £5 million. With Lightyear, you can access them with no minimum deposit criteria. There are no fees to open, bank transfer into, withdraw from, or maintain your business account, and your money is always easily accessible. You work hard for your income as a business owner. Lightyear lets your income work hard for you. So rather than spending weeks trying to open an account with low rates and high fees, open a Lightyear business account in one day and start putting your money to work. Whether you choose to manage your company's cash on Lightyear's Slick app or the web platform, the interest you earn could mean you can hire a new employee or take that holiday you know you deserve. Visit lightyear.com/donut. That's donut, DONUT, to find out more and set up your account in just a few taps. And remember, when you invest, your capital is at risk. It's now time to meet our expert, chartered accountant and experienced financial director, Kate Gloudemans. Hi, Kate. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, lovely to meet you.
So I wanted to start by kind of talking about the fact that probably for most small businesses, when they start their businesses, they don't have a lot of experience or necessarily know-how around financial management. Is that something that you can kind of pick up as you go?
I think it is really. There are always going to be some people that don't have the inclination and will always struggle. But with a lot of the businesses we've worked with, they have nothing. They've, been self-professed, I hate finance. And I think it's just a bit, it's basic admin really at the end of the day. It's thinking about how your business works. So for example, you've invoiced a client or a customer, you've raised the invoice, great. And then it's just tracking when you're getting payment for that client and just it's real basics like that. And when you add it all together, you've got all your sales and you've got all your costs. So it's, if you overthink it, I think it can be intimidating. But, there's lots of people out there that can give you support and guidance, and sometimes getting a bit of training gives you, sometimes I think it's the confidence to know, yes, I'm doing it right.
Yeah. So when we say manage your finances, what do we actually mean?
Well, manage your finances. I mean, it's interesting. Manage your finances is often also referred to financial management. And at the simplest level, it's about how you manage your cash to help you achieve your goals and objectives in your business. So it's things like looking at the risks and what can you do to reduce them. It's about how you can operate more efficiently. So spending less to achieve what you need to do. It's about managing your cash flow, making sure you don't run out of money. It's the little things, I say the little things, quite big things, but making sure you're compliant when it comes to tax and legislation. It's about maximising the amount of money you can make in the business, which obviously you get at the end of the day as the business owner. And most importantly, it's about helping your business survive. So, there's a few things to do when you're managing your business. So, the basic for me is about setting a realistic budget and forecast. And a lot of people say, oh, I'm only a small business, I don't need to set a budget and forecast. You absolutely need to. And it can be the most simple spreadsheet or piece of paper, but it's about saying, what do I need to spend to run my business? And it's those core costs. It's not all the frivolous things you might spend. It's what do I need to do? And then when you look at that, you identify, right, that's my baseline costs. How much revenue do I need to make to cover those costs? And then when you've got that, it gives you that point to come back to. And whether you look at it on a monthly or quarterly basis, you can see how you're performing. So that's the key thing. And obviously, to see how you're performing, you need to keep records. So that is keeping track of, for example, the people you invoice, who pays you, and likewise the people who invoice you, how much you owe to them. And then obviously there's the comparing those actuals to the performance. So if you're spending more than you thought you were going to do, if you don't do that analysis, you don't know, you can continue overspending. But if you're analysing and comparing to what you thought you were going to set, you can do something about it. You can reduce what you're spending, change your phone bill or something like that. And then the final thing is obviously sort of tracking your cash flow. So again, it could be the simplest thing. It could be a spreadsheet or a piece of paper that just details the money that you're expecting to come in and the money that's expecting to come out. And if things get really tight, you can do that on a daily basis. So if the money hasn't come in you're expecting, you can hold off paying somebody else until another week until it comes in, for example. So they're the key components, really.
I guess if you're a new business, that can be quite difficult because you've got no actual figures to base your budget on in terms of what you're spending and realistically how many sales you're going to make. Because I guess, when you're all in the enthusiasm of, I've got this great new business and I'm going to make tons of sales and loads of new, and actually the reality of that doesn't always match up with, your...
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I've done, I do quite a lot of training with new startups on startup workshops. And it's a common question that people have because they say, I've got no idea. But things we have to start somewhere. So, bottom line, I sort of say to people, draw a line in the sand and then you start to get a feel. Obviously, the kind of business you've got might give you an indication. You might see what somebody else is selling. But at the end of the day, you start off with your costs. So there are going to be some costs you need to run your business. So say, for example, you're developing an app. You're going to have your costs that you need to pay for the various software, etc. You're not going to be looking at marketing or bigger spends right now. It's just going to be those baseline costs. So you know what you've got coming through. If you realise that you need to borrow money to do something, then it's about, if you need to get, for example, extra help, find out what that extra help's going to cost.
Yeah.
And if that means you need to borrow some money to do that, so be it. But it is tricky. But that's why I say about setting the budget. It's setting those costs. What do you need to cover? And whether it's your savings that you're using to help set up. Yeah. But the sooner you can adjust to that, the better. But yes, you have to have that. Also, there's an aspiration. The other risk that I see people do is they set a budget that says, we're going to make this much revenue. And, as a result, they've probably got costs that are too high to achieve those figures. So it's, sometimes it's baby steps. See what you're doing. But the most important thing is understanding, how do you grow your revenue? Do you know what is behind the revenue growth that you've got once you start? So if you know what those drivers are, so say, for example, you've got an online shop, you might get 1,000 people that come to your shop one month and say 10% of those people go on to buy. Great. So that might be an indicator. If I get more people coming to my site, as long as they're the same type of people, you'd expect to get 10%. So you might ramp up your visitors and you know what your sales are going to be. But there might be other things you look at. So I get a lot of people to look at, for example, on e-commerce, what's your average order value? So if somebody comes to your website and spends £10 every month, if you can get them to double the amount of money they spend, say, for example, encouraging them to get free delivery, etc., for every person that comes to a website, it increases. So that might be part of your plan and your budget going forward. And if it doesn't take off, what do you need to do differently? But again, coming back to your budget and actuals and adjusting your actions, really.
Yeah, updating your figures based on what's happened.
Yeah, and watching the trends.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you've mentioned that people can keep very simple, records, so using a spreadsheet or something like that. In your experience, how important is it to use accounting software now? Because things are going increasingly digital. What benefits does that bring over doing manual accounts?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, and I'm quite pragmatic when it comes to this, because I have got some people that they really don't need to use accounting software, and they use a spreadsheet. They don't have to look at their numbers quite as regularly as some people do. And actually, I mean, I had somebody recently that started using accounting software, and it just blew her mind, and she became so overwhelmed by it. And that's not what you want. But actually, for most people, the change it gives them when they start using accounting software, it's brilliant, because, the visibility it gets, the simplest level, there's lots of cloud software out there. What they allow you to do is you have your bank feed will automatically feed into the bank account, and you can code it. Lots of tools allow you to automatically code things. If you know something comes in from EE, for example, or whatever, it's telephone. But they're great because first of all, it encourages you to update that information. You're not having to fill in a spreadsheet. And the risk that you've got from a spreadsheet is, it takes longer to do, but there's a huge high risk of manual error there. You just need to sort of add an extra naught or something like that. The numbers are completely different. I mean, maybe that's what you want to do. But, with accounting software, you can take pictures of your receipts as you go. A lot of that has automatically captures the data and tells you how much it is, what VAT is, etc. And it's real-time information. That means that it doesn't feel quite like a chore. And if you've got that information in your system, you're able to monitor and analyse your information far quicker, which allows you to make the decisions and take the action sooner. I've got some people that just see accounting as a compliance, and it's not. It's what you need to understand your business to help grow and manage your cash, really.
Yeah. And if you've got that real-time picture, like you say, and things are not quite as you had anticipated sales-wise, or, someone's late paying you, and you can see that and you can react more quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing to add about accounting software is for sole traders, as of next April, there's going to be this obligation to report on a quarterly basis. And you can only do that if you're either using accounting software or bridging software. Yeah. So, it's fine to use the bridging software, but actually, so if you're a sole trader and you've got revenue of more than 50,000 from April next year, you need to be looking at doing that from an accounting software. So actually, if you can do it sooner rather than later, it allows you to get into the habit of doing it.
Yeah, I think that's an important point for people to note, actually, is that making tax digital, we're already familiar with that from the point of view of VAT.
Yeah.
But, self-assessment's coming under making tax digital from next April for 50,000, and it's being extended the year after that. So within 2 or 3 years, actually, anyone who is self-assessing for tax will need to update their records, like you say, at least quarterly. And that's a whole load easier if you've got the accounting software that's linked.
Exactly. So, if you're having to pull all the information together, it's a stress that you don't need, because actually you want to be running your business and have business as usual. So if you build it into your routine as just another thing that you do every week, it makes sense to do. And there's lots of accounting softwares out there. What works for one person might not work for everyone. I used to be system agnostic. I've now got a few more that I favour more than others, but that's just because of how I work, because I've got other people that prefer others. And there's also, do your research, but there's other software that you can get for free if you've got a bank account, for example.
Yeah.
So, but, cheapest isn't always the best. I've got some people that I've come across that have gone for a cheap software or the offer because it's 6 months free. But actually, it's got limitations as they grow. But we were talking earlier, and actually things aren't finite. If you don't like your accounting software, you can always move over into something else.
Absolutely. So we've talked about accounting software. What about the importance of working with an accountant? What are the benefits of doing that?
I think, if you work with an accountant, the advantage, you don't have to work with an accountant full time, but when you start off, there's lots of unknowns. And if you're not prepared for what you need to know, the risk is that you fall foul of tax issues and, legislation. So there's the key things about knowing, what tax obligations you've got and tracking that. So, for example, I had a client recently who was a new client, and they came on board, and I very quickly realised that they should have registered for VAT 11 months previously. But because they hadn't had an accountant on board, it hadn't been flagged. And because they hadn't registered for VAT, they were liable for VAT for the last 11 months. So, it's if you'd known that in the start, for me, I offer a lot of advice to people that are just starting out. I give them set up. These are the things you need to consider when you start a business. Then they know that, and at least you've got that awareness. And once you've got that awareness, then when the time comes, you don't make the mistake.
Yeah.
The difference between bookkeeping and accounting, as a sole trader, you track your records on what's called a cash basis. So money comes into the bank, it's treated as income. Money goes out, it's treated as expenses. It's quite straightforward. If you're a limited company, it's a bit more complex. You've got sort of change of accounting policies that, to the everyday person wouldn't necessarily know what they need to do. So yes, you can. You're perfectly allowed to produce your accounts and tax returns. You just might not get it right. And I think important to link to this is there's a lot of people that will give you advice about what you can and can't do as a business. So I always call it entrepreneurware. First of all, people who are sole traders or limited companies, what they can and can't claim tax-wise is two very different things.
Yeah.
So just because you're a sole trader doesn't mean you can, or vice versa. But also, there's lots of business owners out there that say, oh, you can claim that, you can claim that. I had a really interesting conversation with a guy who I started to work with. And I just set him up on a piece of software, and he was using the app and he was working out. And I happened to meet him at the local cricket club, and he said, oh, could I, just started asking me a question, talking shop. And as we were talking, this other guy came along and said, oh, you can claim for that, you can claim for that. And I was like, no, you can't, claiming his local lunch from literally a shop just around the corner from where he lived. I said, you can't. But of course, if you listen to somebody that's always done it, you fall foul. Whereas speak to somebody who's an expert and knows their stuff.
Yeah.
Sets you up for the right place, really.
So if you've got an accountant, is it worth talking to your accountant about which software is right for your business and getting advice? Because sometimes they'll say, well, use the same one that your accountant uses, because then they know, familiar with the systems and the codes and all of that.
Yeah, I think it's... this comes back to me saying about us being system agnostic. There are a lot of accountants out there that will say, we use this system, you need to use this. And there's nothing wrong with that. The reason they do that is because they know that software inside out, which means that they can tell you the best way to use it the best way possible. So actually, that means you're going to get that advice. For me, I sort of like to understand what somebody's trying to achieve in their business. What does their business do? If they don't have many transactions and they're not going to be necessarily updating things on a regular basis, then there might be a software that's just quite a simple, cheap and easy software. They just need it so they've got numbers at the end of the day.
They don't need all the bells and whistles.
No, and and there's some software out there that will actually do your entire tax return for you, and produce your accounts. Now, it's not to say they're 100% correct. But I've got a client who comes to me literally every year just to say, I've done my tax return. Can you just check I've posted everything correctly? Because she's worried about that kind of things. There is other software. So, I've got clients who are CICs. They have grants that come in. They need to be able to track the money they spent on the different projects. So there's some software that will allow you to code expenses and revenue to different kinds of projects, which allows you to report as and when you want. But cheaper accounting systems might not. They just give you a straightforward P&L.
So it's about really assessing what your business needs and then having a look at the reviews and, speaking perhaps to other small businesses and saying, well, what do you use? How do you get on with that? Would you recommend it? Yeah,
it's, there's one software that, I can't name, but I've had clients that, there's nothing wrong with the software. And some clients absolutely love it and it's fine, it's brilliant. And, they sing its praises. But for other clients, they just can't get their head around it and have ended up duplicating their costs or their revenue. So in one situation, I had a guy that managed to double up his revenue, not because he was being fraudulent. He's literally just managed to duplicate something because some systems have multiple ways of doing things.
Yeah.
So he'd overstated his revenue. So he thought he'd made more money than he had. So he'd paid himself more dividend than he should have done. The other side, I had a client that had claimed more cost back than they should have done. So the downside with that was they'd claimed more VAT than they should have done. So they had to pay that VAT back. They also then had to pay more corporation tax than they should have done, which was not great. On the plus side, they were more profitable than they thought they were.
So even that's not completely hurdle free.
No, exactly. But, I quite often say to people, get a system, or if someone's got a system, we quite often say to people, we can give you training. So it might be a couple of hours of talking through the best way to do something. Sometimes we'll show them there's multiple ways, but it depends. If we think that they're, like a rabbit in headlights, then I'll teach them one way.
This is the way.
Yes.
So if someone said, yeah, I'm going to, get accounting software, would you recommend that it's worth starting from the beginning? When you start your business, if you're going to do it, start from the off rather than...
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one. If you are really got very basic costs and you're currently, so say, for example, you're developing an app, you've got very few costs, I don't think there's necessarily need to right this point in time. Of course, unless you're a sole trader and making tax digital is going to kick in, but until you get to that revenue threshold, it's not as important. But I think if you build it, for me, it's about building it into big habits. If you see it as a sort of day-to-day part of what you do, you're not going to see it as a chore. A lot of, I spent a long time working in industry, in finance departments. And the biggest challenge I had was that you'd be in a business and that business was there to achieve something. It might be to achieve a goal, and it might not necessarily be profit making, but it still needs money to make it, or it has a goal to grow and it's about, how much profit it makes. But throughout that, everyone would always see finance as a separate department.
Yeah.
But actually finance is it's the light, it's what threads through your entire business.
Yeah.
You need to sort of have that rigor. You need to sort of have those processes, and you need to say, actually, do I need to buy that? No, I don't. Or actually, if I'm going to spend that money, how is it going to help my business grow? And if you're not thinking that way, then you don't have that sort of automatic, weekly rigor of doing your finance admin.
Yeah.
That's where you're going to fall foul, really. And, you see a lot of people that haven't thought about it and come to the table too late to speak to somebody or get advice, and,
Yeah.
But
by then it's terminal.
Yeah, exactly. But, there's a lot of people that might have a spreadsheet and you start, put them into a finance system 3 years later. And we've got other people that use one finance system and then change it to something else. So, that's the beauty of these things. There's so much constant change, which is great because it's in theory making our lives easier rather than more cumbersome. I mean, I go back to the old days, we used to have spreadsheets and books and, pieces of paper and calculators. So it would take 3 years before you knew what you were performing.
We've come a long way. So I wanted to ask you about cash flow. Why is cash flow management so important, and what does it involve?
So in terms of cash flow management, the reason it's important is, you've heard the old adage, cash flow is king. There are so many people that run out of money despite being really profitable, and the business goes under. So cash flow refers to the flow of money coming in and out of your business. If you've got positive cash flow, you obviously get more money in than you're not. And negative cash flow generally isn't seen as a good thing because you're spending more than you're getting in. But it might be that you're spending that money because you're investing for growth. And that's a good thing, because if you're investing for growth, you get more money coming in. So as long as you're managing that, then negative cash flow isn't a bad thing. But cash flow for management is basically when you're forecasting your cash flow, you're monitoring how you're spending, you're analysing how you're spending that money and whether you've got money coming in or not. And it's actively managing how you get money in and out of the business. So, you've obviously got your cash flow and you might be expecting to get X amount in 1 month. That money doesn't come in and you've got outgoings you need to spend, you're in trouble. So, for some people, they might only need to look at it on a monthly basis. But I've worked with some companies that they might have to have like on a daily basis. They literally say what money has come in. And if the money hasn't come in that's due, they push back. And by doing that, it means that nothing's a crisis.
Yeah.
If you can foresee when money's coming in and know literally 3 months in advance or 2 weeks in advance or something like that, what your cash is likely to be, you can take action. So you can say, actually, I need to borrow some money. And you're not trying to borrow money at the last minute when actually you're at the mercy by going, I'm desperate. You're also able to speak to HMRC, for example, if you think you're not going to be able to pay your VAT bill or your PAYE. So it's really important you've got that visibility. You're not just looking at a daily basis. But there's lots of things you can do to manage your cash. So you can look at your customers. So as soon as you do some work for people, make sure you invoice them as quickly as possible. If it's a new client, in fact, bill them up front. That's perfectly acceptable until they prove that they are worthy.
Credit-worthy, yeah.
Exactly, credit-worthy. And do credit checks, Although just because somebody has got good credit checks doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have problems going forward.
No.
So, but, if you haven't done that and someone doesn't pay you, you had the opportunity to do that. So, yes, invoice early. And just making sure again, another reason why accounting software is good, you can get those invoices out quickly. You can also check when somebody is seen that invoice, so they can't say, oh, I didn't get the invoice. But you could also have automatic chasing built in. So you could set it up that the minute it's due, an email goes out saying, hi, yeah, it's due, can you pay the money? Because let's face it, we all get emails that we completely missed, don't we? Hands up. But you can also change that. So you might be, for example, able to send out notifications a week before the invoice is due and just say, just to confirm this is due, any problems, let us know. So if they have missed it, it minimises that excuses to do that. Then in terms of customers, if somebody is giving you 30 days to pay, you don't need to pay them early. I know there's lots of people say support small businesses. I'm all for that, and we should support each other. And if someone says I need to be paid in 7 days, respect that. And if someone says it's 30 days, you don't need to pay them in 7 days. They'll give you 30 days to do that. But it's important to build up good relationships with both your customers and suppliers. So if things got tough, you can have a conversation with your suppliers and say, do you know what, it's a bit tough. Do you mind if I pay you a bit later? And I had that the other day with one of our customers, and I was completely fine about it. And they gave us the heads up. That was great. And I think it's more respectful if you have that conversation anyway. But likewise, so it gives you that flexibility. If you've got stock, that's another place where people fall foul because they want to buy lots of stock, all the cash is tied up. And until you sell that stock, it's just sitting there on the shelves, in your shop, in boxes. So it's about understanding how much you're selling. If you've got to do a big push, or if you need to free up that cash, you can obviously put a sale. It means you're going to lose out money, but at least you can allow some cash to be freed up to get money in. So there's lots of ways that you can manage your cash.
So another area that's really important, I suppose, is we've talked about, improving your cash flow. Another thing is keeping a lid on the costs, the money that you're laying out in the first place. Is it possible to overstate the importance of that?
Yeah, I think it's I've seen quite a few businesses that have gone, things are tight, let's cut back on costs. And they cut back on costs too much. There's an element, you need basic costs to sort of run your business. Staff are invariably the first place where people cut costs, but also they're invariably the first place that helps you grow and generate revenue. So I think, it's important about actually working out what costs are important for your business. What costs can you cut back on? So you can always think, well, actually go back to the basics. When I started out, what did I have? Now, you may not have had the same amount of revenue generation that you had beforehand, but, I worked with a company a few years ago, and they literally every 6 months were cutting back costs and costs and costs. And it just cut so thin that actually they didn't have the ability to grow because they didn't have the sales team to go win the new business. They then didn't have the team to then sort of grow the work. So for me, it's going back to basics to say, actually, how can you manage, and this comes back to financial management, how can you work in the most operationally efficient way? So to make £10, for example, what costs are required to make that £10? Don't overspend it, don't overthink it. And actually, I've talked to somebody recently in terms of staff, an important measure that people look at when they're looking at one of the important numbers is when you look at revenue per headcount, or sometimes I look at it as staff costs as a percentage of turnover. And I use that as a figure because actually it helps me identify any operational inefficiencies. So it may be that you don't need to cut back costs, but it may be, that, for example, that there's a training issue, or there's something that is stopping your staff performing the way they need to perform to achieve that revenue. So as an example, I do a lot of work with creative agencies. I might be going on a tangent, check me if I am. I work with a lot of creative agencies, and obviously the biggest cost is staff. Typically a target benchmark for that agency is about 55%. So if you're not making the revenue that you're expected to for that staff cost base, and that goes higher and higher and higher, you've still got your overheads to cover. Quite often you can sort of fall foul quite quickly. So what I tend to do is I get people to think about, actually look at your staff in a working week. How much of that time do you expect them to be able to spend on billable work? Okay, identify that. Secondly, of that billable time, how much is the client willing to pay for, or how much is the client supposed to be paying for? And then you look at it, and if the client's only paid for 5 hours that week, and your staff, you're giving them 15 hours, why is that? Is it because there's scope creep and the client's just asking for a bit more? Is it because actually your team member isn't trained enough or doesn't know? So I had a situation once with a client that I realised that this one account manager was spending a day and a half producing a report for this client. Now, first of all, this client wasn't even paying for this report. Yeah. So that was the first thing we did. We said, right, okay, this is a report. You want this report. It's going to cost X amount a month. So that was instantly revenue in there. Secondly, the reason it was taking so long was she didn't understand Excel. So I sat down with her, worked out what needed to be done, set up a report, and she could do it in 2 hours. Yeah. So we saved the time. She was able to do that on other revenue generating work. No cost needed to be cut. It's just working about how the resources were being used, really.
Another area I think that makes people feel nervous, I think, about sort of financial management is that there's quite a lot of jargon in there. P&L, balance sheets, all of these terms come in. What do they tell me? What do I need to understand in terms of these, the terminology? What do I need to understand? And what do they then tell me about my business?
Yeah. Okay. So profit or loss, which is also frequently referred to as an income statement, effectively gives you a snapshot of your revenue or your sales or turnover used intermittently, and your costs and your resulting profit. And effectively, when it comes together, that profit and loss provides you with an overview as to how well your business has performed over a set period of time. So it might be over the week, over the month, over the year, etc. So by doing that, you can work out how you're performing as a business. Is that the question, or was there another about balance sheets?
yeah, balance sheets. I suppose the point I was trying to make is that there's a lot of jargon in there. Do we as a small business need to understand all of this kind of key terminology? And if we don't, where do we go to get the answers so that we understand what's going on with the business?
Yeah, so I think you do need to you don't need to necessarily think of it as jargon. A profit and loss is just actually, are you making money? Are you selling more than you're spending to make that money? Bottom line, if you're not making a profit and you're making a loss, you will ultimately be ending up using up more cash. And it's fine if you've got cash. I mean, there are businesses out there, unicorns, that are losing money every month. It's fine. Yeah. They've got investment. They've got huge backing to do that. If you're a business and consistently making a loss, there's a few things. You'll run out of cash eventually. Secondly, if you want to get funding from people, or borrow money, or if you want to sort of, for example, buy something from, somebody, they will look at your credit rating and say, oh, they're loss making. Yeah. So, it's an important thing to do, but it's just, in the most simplest state, you sell something to your client, that's your sales. You incur costs to support those customers, that's your costs. And as long as you make more money than you do spending on it, then you make a profit.
We've touched on it briefly, tax advice. How important is tax advice for businesses?
I had a conversation once about tax advice because I said to somebody, there's proper tax advisors have spent 3 years. In fact, some people spend 3 years focusing purely on that. It depends on the tax advice you're after. I mean, clearly, when you start a business, you need to be aware of what your tax obligations are, how you need to record transactions, when things need to be paid, etc. Clearly, it also makes sense to make sure that you're as efficient as possible so that you can claim the costs you're allowed to, so that you minimise the amount of profit that you have to pay tax on. So that makes sense to do. I have met some people that have been charged an absolute fortune for tax advice that has saved them a bit of money. It hasn't saved them that much money. And actually, they might have been better off getting that advice about how to grow their business. So, it depends, but there's some real basics. And again, there's lots of accountants out there that would, be more than happy to give you half an hour consultation, talk through the basics about what you need to do and what you need to be aware of. For example, with VAT, knowing when those VAT thresholds kick in and when you might have to register for VAT, for example. But, there's lots of people out there that give you tax advice. General rule is if something seems too good to be true, it invariably is. So to be able to claim a cost, for it to be tax allowable when your business, it basically has to be wholly and necessarily and exclusively for your business. And if it's not, you can't claim it. It's slightly different for sole traders. It might not necessarily be exclusively for your business, but if 30% is for your business, you can claim that 30%. But it's a limited company. If it's not 100% business, you can't claim it.
We've covered loads of ground there, Kate.
We have to.
I'm going to ask you what I think is going to be an impossible question now. If you can boil all of that down, what top 3 pieces of advice would you give to a business on managing their finances?
Oh, in terms of what we've talked about, I think the first thing is don't see it as a chore. See it as something that's actually going to help you grow your business and build it into the day-to-day. So everywhere I've worked, Monday morning used to be sit down, reconcile the bank, just check everything's come in that should have done, have a quick look at what's going to happen in the future. Fine, great, move on. If there is an issue, then you can do something about it then. Once we start going about our day-to-day in the business, the stuff that we really love and we're passionate about, we're not going to go back to it. And we're certainly not going to look on it on a Friday afternoon, are we? And actually, it's not fair to look at it at the weekends. You work really hard. And I know people work weekends and stuff. But actually, do it first thing in the morning. That's your rigor. It's about your business. It's about trying to grow your business. You're trying to make an income. Are you doing that? Great, move on. Knowing your tax liabilities and putting money, I didn't really talk about this, but knowing when they're due and putting money aside, I think is really important. There's lots of challenger banks out there that allow you to have a bank account for free. You can use those, have savings pots. So for example, with our business, we've got a bank account that's got a couple of savings pot, one for VAT, one for corporation tax. So we've always got that money there. So there's not a big crisis to say, eek.
Yikes.
Yeah, exactly. I worked with somebody and they got me on board because they realised they had £150,000 VAT bill to pay and they hadn't set it aside and they'd just been spending on the normal operating activities. And because they hadn't been analysing their business, they weren't able to realise. And I think the third thing is, I personally would say, get yourself set up with an accounting system, not just because it's compliance, but use it so that you can help set up a budget and you can track how you're performing against that budget, because then you can understand what you need to do to cut back, what you need to do to grow your business.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Before I let you go, can you tell listeners where they can find you online?
Yes. So my business is called Sprout Consulting. So we're online, which is www.sproutconsulting.co.uk. You can also find me on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook.
Fab. Well, we'll put links to all of those in the summary notes that go with this. But in summary, thank you so much for your time today. There's tons and tons of great stuff in there that I think people are going to go away and feel really empowered.
No, well, I hope it's helpful. And I appreciate it's completely overwhelming. But I think if you can build in that, see it as just, the basic finance, basic admin, then, it makes it easier to do. And if you don't know, ask. I think there's a lot of people that will, put their head in the sand and not do it. And if you're struggling to do it or you don't have the inclination, that's the time to get outside support. Just don't ignore it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thanks a lot. Lovely to speak to you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to my chat with Kate today. Kate shared some great tips and advice there on managing your business finances, how to make managing your finances easier, perhaps by using an accountant or accounting software, and loads of great advice on creating a budget for your business, managing your cash flow, and the importance of invoicing. You can find links to practical guidance and resources from across the donut sites on managing your finances in the summary notes that accompany this episode. You can also learn more about our sponsor Lightyear, and you'll find the summary notes at www.startyourownnbusinesspodcast.co.uk. Before you head off, if you're enjoying the show, hit follow. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, follow's on the top right of the show page, and if you're listening on Spotify, follow's just under our logo and title. Hitting follow makes sure you're notified about new episodes as soon as they drop. It also helps us reach more small businesses just like you. All that remains to be said is another big thank you to Kate for her time and insights today. Until next time, all the best.